Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a plunge into a perspective on reality, human nature, and cosmic history that is, well, perhaps unlike anything you've encountered before. It's definitely complex, it's fascinating, and it really asks us to think in entirely new ways. We're diving deep into excerpts from Rudolf Steiner's book, An Outline of Esoteric Science. Our mission here is to explore these ideas, really try to understand what Steiner is putting forward as a distinct way of knowing and seeing the world, and pull out the core insights this perspective offers.
And right up front, it's important we get a handle on what Steiner actually means by esoteric science. He's pretty clear. It's not about secret knowledge, stuff kept hidden from people deliberately. It's more a science about what is hidden simply because it's not accessible through our ordinary senses or conventional scientific tools. So this deep dive will explore the paths he suggests for accessing this hidden knowledge and what it might reveal about us and the universe.
Yeah, we're focusing squarely on understanding the ideas presented within this source material, just trying to grasp this unique point of view. Okay, so what exactly is this esoteric science then, at its core? Steiner makes this foundational distinction, right? It's not just what you study, but how you study it. He says the key thing is the type of human soul activity involved in seeking knowledge. Like, you know how natural science relies on a certain focus, a certain soul activity directed towards the sensory world?
Yes, exactly. And the key difference here, the really crucial point, is that the facts of spiritual science, or esoteric science as he calls it, they don't just exist out there in the sensory world waiting for you to observe them, even if you don't understand them yet. They only come into our perception through a specific active form of soul activity. So this means that the person exploring this, you, have to actively do something internally to perceive these facts. They aren't just passively observed like, I don't know, watching a stone fall.
Okay. That's a crucial point then. It's not just about reading about it. It's about doing something internally to perceive it yourself. But then, well, how does one prove any of this? Isn't that the immediate question that jumps out?
Yeah, that's the natural question. Steiner addresses this idea of proof. He presents what he describes as the result of a process of discovery. He uses an attitude, he says, trained by natural science, careful observation, a systematic approach, but applies it to these supersensible realms. His position, essentially, is that if a reader genuinely engages with the material in the way it asks meaning, undertaking the necessary inner activity, they will encounter these facts themselves. So it's less about external proof in the way we usually think of it, and more about internal verification. It's kind of like solving a mathematical problem, maybe. The method is valid for everyone, but each person has to work through it themselves to find the solution and see that it works.
Okay, I see. That makes sense. So the value isn't just in believing what's written, but in understanding a method that theoretically allows you to see for yourself. Why is it important then to explore this perspective at all? What does Steiner suggest we might be missing if we only rely on sensory observation?
Well, he argues that the visible sensory world itself actually points clearly towards a hidden, supersensible reality behind it. And if we ignore that or fail to perceive this hidden world, he suggests we're left with these profound riddles about existence that just can't be answered from a purely sensory viewpoint. And this, he suggests, can lead to feelings of doubt, uncertainty, maybe even despair. So he presents this type of cognition, the kind that reveals the hidden, as a potential way to resolve those fundamental human questions and maybe overcome that sense of, hopelessness. It offers a bigger picture.
That framing really resonates the idea that limiting our perception might limit our ability to answer life's biggest questions. Okay, so let's dive into the human being itself then, as viewed through the supersensible lens, because Steiner's perspective here is, well, it's far richer than just the physical body we normally perceive, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, Steiner describes the human being as composed of multiple layers, or bodies, accessible to different forms of perception. Through what he calls supersensible cognition, he identifies four main components: the physical body, the ether body, sometimes called the life body, the astral body, or sentient body, and then the I. So let's maybe take them one by one.
Yeah.
The physical body is, what we know conventionally accessible to our senses, our intellect, related to the mineral world. Though even its full nature, he suggests, is only truly understood with this supersensible knowledge. Next up is the ether body, the life body. This isn't visible to ordinary senses, but he says it is accessible to higher vision. You can recognize its effects, though. In the physical world, it's the force that gives form and vitality, the thing that transforms mineral substance into living substance. It's important to note, Steiner's use of ether here is specific to his system. It's not the ether of modern physics. He really emphasizes it's a palpable body perceived by higher sight, not just some vague life force concept.
Okay, so a life organizing principle. but perceivable in its own right to this higher vision. Got it. What's next?
Then we have the astral body, or the sentient body. This is connected to our inner world of feeling, pleasure, or pain. And importantly, our desires and wishes that go beyond just simple automatic responses, like maybe those in animals. It's the bearer of our soul life in this realm, you could say. And finally, the I. This is what he says fundamentally distinguishes us as human beings. It's our core principle of self-awareness, the source of our unique individuality. We experience it most strongly, obviously, in the waking state, and it enables experiences that aren't just fleeting, but contribute to a continuous sense of self. Steiner actually describes how the force of this I works upon these other bodies, progressively making itself known, kind of shedding the veils from the physical up through the soul layers.
It sounds like these layers provide a kind of map for understanding different aspects of our experience, the physical, the vital, the emotional, and then that self-aware core. How does this perspective interact with, say, conventional views of things like memory or character? Does he touch on that?
Oh, absolutely. That's a great point,
Yeah.
because he uses examples like memory to highlight the difference this perspective brings. He sees human memory as a real perception of past experiences at a later time, something he argues is only possible because of the I's connection to the astral body. He contrasts this with what might look like memory in animals or plants, which he sees more as earlier conditions simply influencing later ones, but without that conscious re-experiencing or perception of the past event itself.
So it's about the quality of the inner experience, the perception.
Precisely. And on character change, while things like temperament might change slowly, he uses the analogy of the hour hand compared to the minute hand on a clock. He definitely asserts that this change is possible and does happen under the conscious or sometimes unconscious influence of the I. It's not just fixed from birth. And building on these soul elements, he talks about the sentient soul, the mind soul, the consciousness soul, which are sort of layers through which the I expresses itself. Steiner introduces this concept of transformation into spiritual elements. Through dedicated inner work and spiritual experience, these soul elements can actually be transformed. So the astral body can transform into what he calls the spirit self. The ether body, often through really profound experiences like those touched by religion or deep artistic feeling, can transform into the life spirit. And work on the very lowest level, the physical body itself can eventually lead to the development of the spirit body, which is the highest spiritual element. The key insight here is that these spiritual elements are seen as the truly eternal part of the human being, developed through our conscious engagement with the non-physical aspects of ourselves.
Wow, okay. So it's a process of refining these non-physical aspects into something enduring, something eternal, just like we need sleep to feel whole and refreshed in the morning. Steiner suggests that understanding the state of sleep is actually essential for understanding waking life. And similarly, that understanding death is key to understanding life itself. How does that work in his view?
Precisely. From this esoteric perspective, sleep isn't just a blank state. It's not just unconsciousness. The physical and ether bodies remain resting, but the astral body and the as are actually withdraw from them, though they remain connected. During this time, outside the physical and etheric envelopes, the astral body and I are said to receive influences from the spiritual world. And this is what replenishes the forces that we use up during the day. So life, from this viewpoint, continues in a different mode during sleep. Forces are refreshed.
So sleep is an active, restorative process involving the spiritual world. Interesting. What about death then? How is that transition described?
Well, the transition to death is described as a continuation and deepening of this withdrawal process we see in sleep. Immediately after death, as long as the ether body is still present, and he suggests this can be for a few days, there appears this incredibly vivid, living memory picture of the entire life just lived.
Like a panorama. The text actually mentions the example of Moritz Benedict, a scientist who described his life flashing before him during a near-drowning experience. Steiner sees this as the ether body, the bearer of this life memory, still being connected for a short time. So this comprehensive life review is the very first step after death.
A full life review.
Okay.
And after that, after the ether body dissolves, the astral body and the I enter a period described as purification. Kama loka, it's sometimes called in other traditions. This is necessary, apparently, to free themselves from desires and habits that were formed purely in connection with the physical body and the outer world, things that have no place or function in the spiritual realm. It's likened to a kind of consuming fire of the spirit that dissolves those sensual desires that weren't expressions of something high or something spiritual within us.
A consuming fire. That sounds intense.
It is. And this purification involves a really profound experience. reliving the life, but in reverse order, from death back to birth. But here's the critical insight, the really striking part. You don't just see what happened, you experience the inverse. So if you cause pain to someone at a certain moment in your life in this backward review, you feel their pain, not your own satisfaction or justification from that moment. This intense experience helps to purify those desires tied purely to physical sensations and organs. It transforms that self-centered experience into a much deeper understanding of connection and consequence.
Wow, that's a powerful idea. Not just reviewing your actions, but feeling their impact on others from their perspective. It really is a kind of experiential karma, isn't it? After this purification, then, where does the journey lead?
After the purification is complete, the I, now carrying what Steiner calls the spiritual fruit or seed of the completed life, those transformed elements we talked about, enters the spiritual world proper. Divachan in some contexts. This realm is perceived by supersensible consciousness as being made up essentially of spiritual beings. It has domains comparable perhaps to earthly elements like land, water, air, but on a spiritual level. And interestingly, thoughts that are described as living, independent realities. The I interacts with these spiritual beings, processing the experiences of the past life, learning and being built up spiritually anew.
So, a period of integration and spiritual growth in a world of spirit beings and living thoughts. Then what prompts the return?
Well, after a certain period, which varies greatly, a new process begins, preparing for a return to earthly existence. A new astral body is gradually formed, drawing on the experiences and growth, followed by the preparation of a suitable etheric, and then a physical body for a new life. This return is described as happening when changes in the physical world align with the I's need or readiness to experience something new for its development. There's described a kind of thirst for physical existence and the unique opportunities for learning and development it provides.
I see. And this brings us squarely to...
Exactly. This is where the concepts of reincarnation and individual human karma come fully into view in Steiner's framework. Souls return to Earth, bringing with them conditions and, you could say, destinies shaped by their past lives. Karma is presented not just as some abstract fate, but as the direct outworking of past actions, feelings, thoughts, and experiences. These are processed in the spiritual world between lives, and then influence the conditions, the challenges, the opportunities encountered in the next physical life. The text is careful to clarify, though, that talents and potentials come from these prior spiritual processes, not just from physical heredity. Heredity provides the necessary physical instrument, the body, which is then shaped and used by the unique spiritual individuality. He uses an analogy. It's like getting wet when you fall in water. The wetness is the effect of the medium, the water. But your inner nature determines how you react, what you learn, if you swim or sink.
That's a helpful analogy. So heredity provides the raw material, but the individuality brings its own history and potential.
Okay, so this whole individual human journey of death, rebirth, karma, it's seen as unfolding within a much, much larger cosmic drama, right?
Yeah.
How does Steiner place humanity within that sweep of cosmic evolution?
Right, it's a vast picture. He describes cosmic evolution unfolding through immense planetary stages. Ancient Saturn, then Sun, then Moon, our current Earth stage, and then the future stages he names Jupiter, Venus, and Vulcan. The key insight here, the core idea, is that the different elements of the human being, those layers we discussed, actually develop sequentially across these cosmic stages. So the very first germ of our physical body began its evolution way back on ancient Saturn. The ether body was added or integrated during the Sun stage, the astral body during the Moon stage, and finally, the I, our core selfhood, our capacity for self-awareness that unfolded here on the Earth stage.
Wow, so our own makeup reflects this vast cosmic history. Who or what guided this process? He describes these evolutionary stages as being shaped and guided by various hierarchies of spiritual beings. He gives them names like spirits of will, spirits of motion, spirits of personality, wisdom, fire, sons of life, spirits of form. It's quite intricate. These different orders of beings played specific roles, apparently, in guiding the development of the cosmos itself and the evolving human being within it at different points in time.
Were there challenges or sort of counterforces in this grand cosmic progression? It wasn't all smooth sailing?
No, definitely not. He describes significant challenging influences, specifically what he terms Luciferic and Ahrimanic powers. Luciferic influences are generally described as leading towards a premature spiritualization, maybe, but also fostering pride, egoism, entanglement in the physical world in a way that leads to misuse of freedom and certain forces. They tempt us away from the earth, in a sense. Ahrimanic influences, sometimes called Mephistophelian, tend to do the opposite. They harden consciousness, promote materialism, make the physical world seem like the only reality. They foster fear, intellectualism devoid of heart, and try to isolate the soul, especially after death, cutting it off from the spiritual. These are seen as necessary counterforces within the larger evolutionary process, though. They provide the resistance needed for human freedom to develop, but also bring the constant possibility of error and going astray.
So forces pulling us too far one way or the other, and our path is navigating between them. How does this cosmic history connect to our more familiar human history?
He connects it directly, particularly through what he calls the post-Atlantean cultural epochs. He outlines a sequence: ancient India, ancient Persia, the Egypto-Chaldean period, the Greco-Roman period, and our current fifth modern era. These are presented as stages where humanity, after a major shift in consciousness, the sinking of Atlantis being a symbolic marker, focused on developing specific soul faculties one after another. The general mission of this whole post-Atlantean phase, he suggests, was to conquer the physical world using our newly awakened capacities for thought and feeling, but doing so somewhat cut off from the direct spiritual perception that was apparently more common in earlier, more ancient stages.
So a necessary descent into matter, in a way, to develop individuality and intellect.
Yes, something like that. And within this modern period, he discusses significant turning points. The Christ event, for instance, is presented as a central event, a kind of fulfillment of prophecy, which introduced a new impulse into Earth evolution. An impulse that makes it possible, he says, to find the spiritual worlds again, but now through individual effort and insight, not requiring the special altered states of consciousness used in the ancient mystery traditions. And crucially, he describes a shift in modern times, starting around the 15th century, towards the intense cultivation of reason and intellectual thinking. While this naturally meant a decline in the old forms of clairvoyance and traditional spiritual knowledge, he argues it paved the way for a new form of supersensible consciousness. This knowledge, which Steiner sometimes calls the knowledge of the Grail, is presented in a way that can be understood and grasped by our modern intellectual and feeling capacities. It's spiritual knowledge, but accessible to the modern rational mind, if that mind is willing to undergo a certain training.
Okay, this brings us right to the practical side then. If all this hidden reality exists, and it's accessible through a certain kind of soul activity, how does one actually do that? What is this path to higher knowledge he talks about?
Right. Steiner describes this as a path of spiritual training, often referred to as initiation, though maybe spiritual development is a less loaded term for modern ears. The purpose is quite clear: to consciously develop those dormant spiritual organs of perception within us that he spoke of earlier, those lotus flowers in the astral body. It's presented as a structured, methodical path, although he does note that spontaneous awakening or initiation can happen based on development from previous lives or intense life experiences. But generally, he emphasizes the need for conscious training.
What does that training involve? What are some key practices?
Well, he mentions several key practices. One is concentrated thinking. This means focusing all your soul energy, all your attention, on a single chosen mental image or symbol, especially symbols that aren't just copies of physical things, but represent spiritual ideas. The point isn't just the object itself, but the intense, sustained focus, which helps free the soul's activity from its usual dependence on the physical brain and senses. Another core practice is cultivating the meditative state. This isn't just relaxation. It's described as a state of higher wakefulness. It's like sleep in that the soul is somewhat freed from the direct input of the physical body, but unlike sleep, you remain fully conscious. This state allows the soul to begin experiencing its own independent nature and to perceive a different, non-physical reality. It requires, he says, summoning stronger inner forces than we usually use.
Okay, concentration and meditation. What else?
Inner tranquility is also vital. This means developing the capacity to consciously control your own thoughts and feelings, creating inner periods, free from the constant barrage of daily life's impressions and reactions, allowing only what the soul chooses to admit into consciousness during these times. This strengthens the inner life, he says, without necessarily needing to withdraw from everyday responsibilities. It's about inner mastery. And a fascinating, maybe unusual sounding practice he mentions is reviewing experiences in reverse. So at the end of the day, visualizing the day's events, or maybe a drama you watched, or even a melody, but playing it backward in your mind from end to beginning. This apparently does several things. It strengthens the power of visualization independent of memory. It helps free thinking from the automatic linear sequence dictated by sense perception. And that freedom is described as necessary preparation for navigating the spiritual world, where time and sequence work differently.
Reviewing in reverse. That's intriguing. So it's a conscious training of the inner life, almost like spiritual gymnastics, designed to develop these new capabilities. What are the results, then, if someone undertakes this training?
Well, the first results are described as the gradual development and awakening of those spiritual sense organs, the lotus flowers, which he says appear or become perceptible in the astral body, often near corresponding physical organs like between the eyebrows, near the larynx, the heart, the solar plexus. Becoming conscious of these developing organs allows entry into a higher world of perception. The first stage of actual perception gained through these developed organs is called imaginative cognition. This allows one to perceive processes of transformation, how things become something else, the life behind the form. And importantly, to perceive what lives on after death, like those transformed soul elements we discussed earlier. The experiences at this stage might be described using sensory terms like warmth, sound, light, color, but they're understood as being soul spiritual realities, not physical phenomena.
Okay, so perceiving the dynamic, living aspect behind things. What comes after imagination?
A higher stage is called inspiration. Here, the knowledge gained isn't just about seeing transformations or forms, but perceiving the inner qualities, the nature, and the relationships between spiritual beings. The knowledge is immediate. It's not something you perceive and then think about. The understanding is simultaneous with the experience itself. This stage, he says, requires the development of a specific intricate network within the ether body.
Immediate knowing of inner qualities and relationships. And beyond that,
And finally, there is intuition. This is presented as a stage beyond inspiration, necessary for perceiving even higher spiritual realms and processes, like certain deeper aspects of the journey between death and a new birth, or the activities of the highest spiritual beings. This stage also involves further, more profound changes and developments within the ether body. Now, a very significant encounter that happens on this path, as these organs begin to develop, is the meeting with what Steiner calls the guardian of the threshold. This isn't an external being in the usual sense, but a powerful self-perception. It's described as encountering one's own double, but perceived externally, as it were. It's an objective image of one's own true inner nature, including all the weaknesses, the unresolved karma, the personality flaws, the things that hinder the development of the higher self. Encountering this requires a very strong foundation of sound judgment, moral character, and a developed conscience, cultivated beforehand through the training. This guardian acts as just that, a guardian. It effectively blocks entry to the higher spiritual realms until the individual is sufficiently prepared and purified to enter without harm to themselves or others. Interestingly, he says this guardian is also encountered after physical death. Overcoming the natural instinct to shrink back from this often sobering self-revelation requires consciously, determinedly striving towards one's higher potential, the higher self.
wow, that sounds like a profound and, yeah, potentially quite challenging confrontation with oneself. A necessary one, though, it seems. So the significance of this entire path, this training, is that it's presented as the means to personally verify the complex picture of reality Steiner's describing. It's not just about belief.
Precisely. That's the core claim. Through this path, the concepts presented in the book about the structure of the human being, karma, reincarnation, cosmic evolution, are no longer just intellectual ideas or articles of faith. They can become, potentially, matters of direct inner experience and perception. It is the method, presented as universally valid like a scientific method, for anyone willing to undertake the inner work that allows one to transition from merely understanding the description of supersensible worlds to having some degree of actual perception of them.
Right. It's clear, though, that these ideas, this whole approach, diverges significantly from, well, most conventional scientific and philosophical views today. How does Steiner address that potential clash? Does he engage with skepticism?
Yes. The text indicates he was very aware of potential criticisms. It mentions he knew his ideas might seem questionable from the standpoint of physics, regarding concepts like heat, maybe, or from philosophy. Kant's epistemology is specifically mentioned as a counterpoint he considered. He basically states that he had studied these fields himself and felt his approach, rooted in supersensible observation as a valid form of cognition, alongside sensory observation and intellectual thought, was justified from its own premises. He also acknowledges the inherent difficulty of finding adequate language for these non-sensory experiences. He states that his descriptive style aims to carefully approach these realities through words, knowing that direct comparison to the sensory world will always fall short. It's an attempt to point towards the experience.
It's a challenge inherent in describing the indescribable, I suppose. Wow, okay. We've really covered a tremendous amount of ground in this deep dive today. We started with Steiner's definition of esoteric science, not secret. but a science of the hidden, accessible through specific inner work. Then we explored the multi-layered nature of the human being, physical, etheric, astral, and the I, and how these can potentially be transformed into eternal spiritual elements. We journeyed through the fascinating and perhaps sobering account of the post-death experience, the vivid life review, the purifying process of experiencing the impact of our actions on others in reverse, entering the spiritual world, and preparing for a new birth, which brought in reincarnation and karma. Then we place that whole human journey within this vast canvas of cosmic evolution, understanding how the different parts of our being apparently developed through ancient planetary stages, influenced by various spiritual hierarchies, and also challenged by these Luciferic and Ahrimanic forces. And finally, we delved into the practical path Steiner outlines for potentially accessing this knowledge directly. The spiritual training involving concentration, meditation, inner tranquility, even reviewing life backward, all aimed at developing new organs of perception, leading through stages of imaginative cognition, inspiration, and intuition, and including that significant self-encounter with the guardian of the threshold.
Yeah, it's certainly a perspective that offers a truly radical rethinking of what it means to be human. It suggests a deep connection to the cosmos, gives a narrative for where we might have come from, where we might be going, and holds out the possibility for conscious development and spiritual perception even, or perhaps especially in our modern times, through what he called the knowledge of the Grail.
It absolutely leaves you with a lot to contemplate. Thinking about that specific idea, how the journey after death involves experiencing the consequences of our actions, but from the perspective of those affected, and how this intense experience shapes our future path and possibilities. If that perspective holds true, what does that profound interconnection and the potential for transformation it implies suggest about the real weight and meaning of our interactions, our choices, our inner work right now in this present moment?
That's a powerful question to leave with. It really brings the whole cosmic journey right back down to individual responsibility and potential here and now.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Rudolf Steiner's An Outline of Esoteric Science.